We're so honored to have Thomas Massie, Congressman Thomas Massie, with us. He's, yeah. You know, he's got some stories from the early days of COVID. He did the math and realized that 2 weeks to flatten the curve was going to be useless, and it would not be 2 weeks. Then, of course, they decided to pass a spending bill of trillions of dollars. And I think he was the only person to vote against the CARES Act. Is that right? The only person. And if that hadn't passed, the lockdowns would never have been funded. And the incredible thing is that he read, I don't know, something like, was it the Constitution that that said you had to have a quorum for this vote, so he made everybody come back to Washington, all these politicians. Are you out of your mind? There's a respiratory virus on the loose. Yeah. Anyway, I'll just introduce Thomas Massie. Let's give him a welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you all. I don't know. Wait till you hear the speech. It might not be that good. It might not be that good. So, first of all, I haven't seen a crowd this big since the State of the Union. And we have 435 seats in Congress, right? Plus 6 for the delegates who can't vote. And then they bring in folding chairs just like this for the Supreme Court and the Senate. It's like the Legion of Evil, right, when they assemble all of it. I've never seen so many crooks in one place. So let me start out with my own little bio. I grew up in Appalachia, and if you call it Appalachia, I'll throw an apple at you. I tell J.D. Vance, I'm from Vanceburg, Kentucky. I tell J.D. Vance, I've literally told him this, that he's appropriating my culture. He's from Ohio, for goodness sakes. I grew up, as I was growing up in Appalachia, I was a little nerd. I took everything apart. I wanted to know how things worked. And I took apart all my mom's appliances. I built robot arms. My dad was a beer distributor. He had some moving beer signs that I was able to turn into robot arms. And so my pathway out of Appalachia, because I grew up in the poorest county in Kentucky that I represent. So I represent 21 counties. They never thought the poorest county would be the one that produced the congressman that represents all of them. But my path was like, on a black hole, you can get to what's called the event horizon, and then light gets sucked back in. Nothing can pass the event horizon. For me, the event horizon from where I started out in Lewis County was MIT. I made it to there, and then I got sucked back to Vanceburg, Kentucky. I actually met my late wife in high school, so we were high school sweethearts. And she was a nerd, too. She was building an yttrium barium cupric oxide superconductor on her farm. And, you have to supercool those things, but from the artificial insemination, liquid nitrogen, she had that on the farm, so she made a superconductor. And the ruse was that I would go help her with her science project, because I was a nerd, too. The problem is I didn't know anything about chemistry. I was building robots, but everybody bought it. Anyways, we both ended up going to MIT. And I just read about it. I never even got to visit the campus until I showed up for class the first week. And when I showed up, there's one road that goes through MIT. Thank goodness there's not a lot, because they're all nerds and nobody's paying attention to traffic. But I was crossing Massachusetts Avenue that goes right through MIT, and there was a crosswalk, and I went through the crosswalk, and I heard a little car beep at me. And I thought, holy shit, I have been here 4 hours and already run into somebody from Kentucky. So I waved back at the car that was beeping at me. And people don't believe that story. Not only is it true, it went on for a month before I could quit waving at cars that were honking. My wife and I started a company while we were in college. We raised $32 million of venture capital. I started it in the artificial intelligence laboratory at MIT. Now, this is before AI worked. And it was a virtual reality interface to computers. So I say, my career started out in artificial intelligence and virtual reality, and now in Congress, I'm experiencing artificial intelligence and virtual reality again. So my wife and I, we had this high-tech startup. We were in New England. We got stuck in Massachusetts, but we moved to New Hampshire where it said live free or die. That sounded kind of friendly to us. So we moved to New Hampshire, and we got our family started, and after 10 years of being in this high-tech company, high-paced world in Massachusetts, we decided it was better to raise our kids on the farm that my wife grew up on in Kentucky, and so we just picked up everything and left and went back to Kentucky and kind of got sucked back in. We built a house off the grid, so I've been off the grid for over 20 years. I say that if Thomas Jefferson could buy his electricity from a government-mandated, controlled, monopoly cooperative, or he could make it on his farm, he would have made it on his farm, I guarantee that. Because that umbilical, that cord that goes to you, is how they implement half the taxes and half the control. You don't want to do something according to their building codes, they don't come arrest you, they turn your electric off. And so that was, and the reason I went off the grid, one of the big reasons is I didn't want to pull any permits. So to this day, my house doesn't even have an address. It frustrates the post office. I get my mail somewhere else. So my house ran off lead acid batteries for 12 years. They're not very environmentally sound. They failed because they had a 10-year warranty. Of course they failed in the 12th year. And I wanted to buy a Powerwall, but Elon wouldn't sell me one because I was going off the grid. So I took a wrecked Model S Tesla battery and took it apart and rewired it, and it's been running my house for about 9 years continuously. So what am I going to do on my farm? Well, I started looking at farming. This was 20 years ago. And it was a chance to start over. We bought the farm from my wife's parents, but they had torn down all the fences and everything. And I started looking at this, and it was a losing proposition. Nobody was making money. The old farmers that were doing it was more or less a hobby, and they were supporting it with their pension fund or their retirement checks, or maybe they had a wife who taught school, and that supported the farm. And so I didn't want to be one of those farms. I wanted to try to figure out how to make money. So I bought one of Joel's books. This was 20 years ago. So I knew about him 20 years ago, and I met him about 12 years ago here on Polyface. Actually brought Rand Paul here. He said, and I forced Rand to read one of Joel's books. And so Rand and I came here, and we went back, and we were having a meeting with Senator McConnell, who also happens to be from Kentucky. And Rand was trying to explain to Senator McConnell how Polyface works. And he said, he's got these rabbits in cages, and they poop, and then the chickens come in, and they peck out all of the larvae out of the poop, and it doesn't stink. And McConnell's looking at Rand like he's got three eyes. And he said, so this is what you two do for fun on the weekends. But in all seriousness, this is where Maha started, like half a century ago. Joel's been Maha from the very beginning. When my farm grows up, it wants to be Polyface. And every time I'm here, I do a lot of R&D. I rip off and duplicate one more thing that Joel did. One of the things I R&D'd was these chicken tractors. But my chicken tractor, when my kids got old and left the house, there was nobody to move my chicken tractor when I went to D.C. So using my MIT electrical engineering degree, I built a chicken coop that moves itself. And it's like a Roomba. And it's running today on sunlight back on my farm. It's got 27 broilers in it, which is about as many as I want to try and butcher in a day. It's got 27 broilers in it. And the first version of it that I built had a battery in it. And again, just like my house, the battery failed. And I'm like, this is not environmental. What do you mean? I got to take this Barbie Jeep battery to the landfill now? It was a Barbie Jeep battery. Those always fail. I think it's like a scheme to make money on Barbie Jeeps. So I figured out a way to do it with capacitors. supercapacitors. And they use these in hybrid cars, and they last 300 years. They'll last, you could put my chicken tractor in a barn and pull it out 100 years later, and it will work, even if the capacitor has been totally dead for 100 years, because they're solid-state devices. So, of course, I call it the Klux capacitor. One of Joel's advisements to everybody who want to do farming but kind of be a little bit weird, he says, you can be a nudist if you want, or you could be a Buddhist if you want, but don't be a nudist Buddhist. I have not followed his advice. I cross Wagyu cattle with Angus cattle. I call them Wangus. And I raise them on grass, which is like the opposite of what you're supposed to massage Wagyu cattle and feed them beer and stuff. I don't do that. So here's how I got into government. I wrote a letter to the editor. They were going to zone our county. Now, zoning may be appropriate in some places. It's to keep the smokestacks out of the cul-de-sacs, is what I say. But we didn't even have smokestacks in our county. We had no industry, and we had no cul-de-sacs. Like I saw them in movies, subdivisions and things. But our houses, there's like one road up the holler, and that's it. You build a house on either side of the road that goes up the holler or on the main road. So I fought zoning. I said, you know what this means? You can't start a sawmill. You can't start a used farm equipment business. You can't start a daycare. You can't do any of that without going to the people that control our government down there in the middle of our county in Vanceburg. You have to go to Vanceburg and ask their permission. So I started sort of a revolt on that. I got 30 people to show up to the meeting where they were going to form the zoning commission. And I stood up to give my speech, and I was speaking against one of my aunt's best friends, like this really nice grandma who thought she was doing the Lord's work. And I gave the story about boiling a frog in water and how this was just the beginning. And I got 5 minutes in, and she told me to sit down. My time had expired. So now I've got the stare down with the grandma. And I refused to sit down, and somebody in the crowd stood up and said, so how's this work? We each get 5 minutes? And she said, yes. He said, and this guy was a Democrat. He said, I'm giving him my 5 minutes. And so I cleared my throat, and I was getting ready to speak, and everybody else stood up, the whole freaking crowd, and said, we're all giving him our 5 minutes. So I had and she dutifully counted every head and said, Mr. Massie, you have 150 minutes. So I slowed down. I drawled out my words. So, by the way, does anybody here belong to an HOA? Yeah. Does anybody here like their HOA? You know, ISIS began as an HOA. Don't let them get a toehold. All right, I've got to remind me of the jail story, because I feel like I'm running behind on time, and if I have time, I'll talk about the jail story. Somebody just gave me her 5 minutes. I'm not sure she has 5 minutes. All right, what the hell? I'll tell the jail story. All right, so I ran for county judge executive, which is a local office, who was the guy who was doing all these things that I was writing letters to the editor against. He wanted to raise our taxes. The irony was they were going to put more money into the conservation district board. But if you discovered what they were doing, it was like 8 men who were giving grants to themselves to build hay barns and stuff. And they just wanted to get bigger. And the irony was they were going to take money from farmers, which was the predominant industry in our county. And the farmers were the conservationists who were actually doing the conserving of land. So I wrote a letter to that. I stopped that. But anyways, I eventually said, you know what, it'd be easier just to take that guy's job and keep all this shit from happening. So I ran against him. He was a Republican, and I beat him in a primary. And so I remember they gave me the key to the courthouse. And when I went to unlock it the first day of in office, because that was my job. It's a small government, small county. I had the key, and I had to unlock it and start the boiler. It looked like the African Queen. You had to kick it to get it running, or else everybody in the sheriff's office and the clerk's office and the jail, they'd be cold. Anyways, so I got there, and then one day the jailer comes to me, and he said, Judge, they all call me Judge, even though I have no law degree. He said, Judge, we got a problem. I said, what's that? He said the hot water heater doesn't work on the state inmate side. So we had county inmates and state inmates. The state inmates, you could take them, they went out and worked. They picked up trash on the side of the road and stuff like that. And they were getting stinky. And I said, well, what's the problem? Can't you just buy a hot water heater? He said, well, this is a special hot water heater, and I got a quote, and they want $12,000 for this. And I'm like, $12,000? Hell, I plumbed my own house. I could probably do this. So I go and look at the hot water heater, and whoa, this thing looks like it belonged in a hotel. I mean, it was not your hot water heater in your basement. So I couldn't get one at Lowe's, so I got on eBay and found one for $5,500. And I did a buy it now. Called a meeting of the county court, did buy it now. This thing shows up. I didn't pay for the tailgate fee because I had inmates to pick it up off the truck. I got 3 inmates in there in the closet, and they stripped the old hot water heater out and put it in the courtyard. And I said, all right, I'm going to go in there and put the new hot water heater in, but I only want 1 inmate with me in that closet. We're plumbing the hot water heater, not me. And so I had 2 inmates who didn't have anything to do, and they were already on work release. Didn't make sense to lock them back up. I said, go strip the old hot water heater of anything valuable. You're here in jail for stripping copper anyway. Pretty sure you know what the value of everything on that is. I mean, they take aluminum wheels. They could tell you the spot price on long iron and short iron. Anyways, I go in, I get the hot water heater hooked up. It boots up. It's got a computer and everything. The other inmates can see me as I walk in and out of that closet through the rec room. There's like 30 of them with their faces pressed against the glass. They've never seen a county judge executive do any work. So I go back out to the guys who are stripping the hot water heater, and I said, okay, you got everything of value except the most valuable thing. And they said, no, Judge, we do this. We did this before we got arrested. And I said, no, the most valuable thing is still on that hot water heater. They said, what is it? And I walked over, and I said, you see this lime green inspection sticker? I said, get it moist and peel it off and glue it on the new one. They told me I would go to jail for that, but I said, but at least I'll have a hot shower. All right, now on to Congress. One of the, I've already thrown out the term here, R&D. What's it stand for? Rip off and duplicate. So when I got to Congress, that's the first thing I did, rip off and duplicate. Ron Paul had a bunch of good bills, and he was leaving, and I thought, well, I'll introduce End the Fed. Thank you. And they had this raw milk bill. And I was like, at the time, I didn't drink raw milk. I drink it 3 times a day now. But at the time, I thought it was your right to drink it if you wanted it. So I introduced this bill, but I got like 20 co-sponsors before I put it in the hopper. These folks, Ron Paul never tried to really get co-sponsors, so he never got anybody else in trouble but himself. But I got 20 other people in trouble when I went over the wall. So I put the raw milk bill in the hopper. The milk lobby had never seen so many co-sponsors on the raw milk bill. And they went on full bore attack. And they, within 12 hours, all their trade publications said there wouldn't be enough hospitals to keep the dead and wounded. I mean, this is their own product. They're saying it's going to maim and kill babies and children. And so my late wife, her Google alerts were going off. She was in Kentucky. I was in D.C., and she was very concerned for me. And she texted me. She said, OMG, I didn't realize the lactose lobby was this intolerant. So let me see if I can find it here. Oh, there it is. I got credit cards and I got my voting card. So this is how we vote in Congress. I remind people it doesn't belong to me. This is, unfortunately, it's like RFID or something, I know. But you put it in the machine and you vote yay or nay. And it's got my picture on it, but it belongs to 750,000 people in Kentucky. So I don't give it to the Republican Party. I don't give it to the Speaker. I don't give it to the whip team. I don't even give it to the Freedom Caucus, which is a voting bloc. Super nice guys and gals, but no thanks. I don't need to be part of it. They told me we need 40 people will do the right thing every day. I said, you only need 39 as a group. Come join me any day you want. I don't need the beer and pizzas and the meetings and talking to each other and trying to prove how smart we are to each other. Anyways, so you put it in the machine. There's like 40 machines on the floor, and you press yay or nay. The button is red and green in case you can't read. I say it should stand for spend and don't spend, because almost every bill is a spending bill. And so one day I was paying for a meal in a restaurant, and I thought this was my credit card, and I gave it to the waitress. And she took it, and she tried tapping it. She tried swiping it. She tried chipping it. And she came back and said, "Sir, your card was rejected." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "It's already got $35 trillion on it." Smart waitress. That's the problem that we have. So, but my colleagues don't care. They just keep spending. And by the way, we say this is this will catch up with us and our grandkids will have to deal with this. No, we are dealing with it. You're being taxed by inflation every day. Like, they want you to believe your grandkids will have to deal with this. This is why interest rates are going up and inflation is not going down anytime soon, because now we're to the point where we're actually monetizing our own debt. And so to draw attention to this, I built this thing called a debt badge. And we're passing one of these around so you can see it. But it's electronic. It's connected to treasury.gov via Wi-Fi. And it gets the debt to the penny once a day, and then it updates every millisecond. So the numbers are spinning so fast you can't see it. It's meant to induce anxiety. My colleagues have told me, "Thomas, you don't need any accoutrements to induce anxiety." But anyways, I thought they needed more anxiety. And without fail, at least once a week, I'm in an elevator with a Democrat who thinks it's my step counter. I get that so much. I'm like, no, you can't. At the speed of light, since Jesus Christ was born, he couldn't cover this many steps in those sandals. So we're passing that around so you can see it. But I wear it on my lapel, and one day I had a congresswoman staring at it. She just couldn't not look at it. And I told her, "Beth, my eyes are up here." I didn't realize she was game. She said, "Make a belt buckle out of it." I just walked away. So there's a lot of people who are concerned with the balance of power between government. The executive branch, whether it's Barack Obama or Joe Biden or Donald Trump, they issue these executive orders. Most of the laws are actually implemented as regulations, and they're not voted on by us. And it's almost impossible to change a regulation once it gets into place. And my colleagues were so concerned. This was when Obama was president and John Boehner was the speaker. And they wanted the balance of power restored, and they thought the Supreme Court could do it. So they invited Antonin Scalia. This was before the Freedom Caucus. So it was a bunch of us who were right-leaning. There were 12 of us who had breakfast with Antonin Scalia. And when he's the Supreme Court justice who's passed away since then. And they asked him to speak on restoring the balance of power. And he took the microphone. He said, "I'm not going to speak on this because it's not my job. I don't referee fights between your branch and the executive branch. My job is as a jurist. Did somebody get harmed? What's the remedy?" That's what a jury does. That's the place for a jury and a court. And he said, sometimes, incidentally, we have to interpret laws and determine constitutionality, but the whole balance of power is not my job. And in fact, you're already the most powerful branch of government. You're the first one listed in the Constitution, and every tool you need to reclaim your authority is right there. And one of my colleagues, it was going over his head, and he said, "But Justice Scalia, with all due respect, it's too hard to impeach somebody. We've tried. We tried it against Eric Holder. There's no way you can get 2/3 vote in the Senate to impeach somebody." And Scalia shook his head. He said, "I'm not talking about impeachment. You guys have the power of the purse. If you don't want Obama to do something, don't give him the money for it. You are funding everything you complain about. Quit funding the things you complain about." And I loved it. I wanted to jump up and do a cheer when he said that, because I've been saying that all along. Let me tell you about some of the fights that I've had in Congress. on 15 days to slow the spread. Okay. I woke up and that morning and to the news that we were going to have 15 days to slow the spread. And there was a virus problem set at MIT, actually, in my differential equations class. And you model, there's 3 variables. It's the infected, the uninfected, and the recovered. And you can model the spread of a virus. It's a differential equation. It's a when they talk about flatten the curve, that curve is a differential equation. So I sat down and did the differential equation. And I'm like, and I had to use assumptions based on, we didn't know a lot about COVID at the time, but there had been like 2 or 3 cruise ships where basically everybody was exposed. And so you had some really decent data to plug into this differential equation. And my wife, my late wife, who also went to MIT, when she woke up, I said, would you check my math? And she checked it. And I said, this is right, isn't it? And she said, yeah, 15 days doesn't do anything. Like, if you just want to lock people down, it takes like years. And then the assumption is that you've got a solution in that period of time, because as soon as you open it back up, it goes back to where it was. It doesn't do a thing. So I knew it was a lie from the beginning. And then shortly after 7 days into 15 days to slow the spread, we got an email, a text from the WHIP team. We're going to spend $2 trillion to solve this problem. But it was bailouts. It funded the states to do the lockdowns. It funded the mail-in elections. And then there was lots of goodies in there for pet projects people had wanted to fund for a long time, and they knew they could get away with it. It was $2 trillion, and they said, stay home, nobody come and vote on this. We'll do it by unanimous consent. Now, the Constitution requires 218 to pass anything. But the assumption is that the Speaker of the House is not blind, and that when he looks out there, he sees 218, even if he's looking at an empty room. And so if he does it and nobody objects, then it's his word versus anybody else's, and if nobody else's is there, it happens. So I got in a car at midnight and drove all the way to Washington, D.C., and got there at 9 in the morning. It takes me 8 hours, but I slept for 1 hour in a rest stop. I almost ran out of gas because the gas stations were all closed. And I found a gas station. There were signs saying, pull over, don't, get off the roads unless you're a trucker. And I found a gas station where you could put your credit card in. There was nobody there, and it would give you gas. But that's when I realized central bank digital currency, they could have stopped me from getting to D.C. Like, it would have been that simple by just shutting off my credit card to get the gas. Anyways, I made it to D.C. I objected. Oh, my gosh. They had to assemble at least half of Congress. And everybody thought this was Ebola. And even though the cruise ship thing had shown, that with the mortality, even for the most at-risk population. And they hated me for breathing air. They were so mad at me because there were airplanes. They were about to shut down the whole government. And there's something else that I can tell this group, and you'll know I'm not crazy, and I can give you facts to go look at. They were about to shut down the corridor between New York and all of New England and the rest of the country. They were going to control access on that highway. And they had the guy who was going to take over the government. I know that sounds crazy, but look up General O'Shaughnessy and Newsweek. Okay, this was their general who was going to take over the interim government, because in our laws it says if the government can't function, that there will be an interim government, because it's a security risk. Like, Russia could take advantage of us if Congress can't meet and the president can't make it to the White House and all this other stuff. It's called COOP and COGS, continuity of government, and most of this stuff is sealed. Like, you don't know what they're going to do when the shit hits the fan, or when they make you think the shit hits the fan. And there were so many people who would be so excited to push Trump off to the side and say, we need this interim government. But go look it up, General O'Shaughnessy. He was the guy. They were having him on Fox News. They were introducing you to him, a guy you had never seen before, was doing interviews on CNN and everywhere else, because he was going to be your boss if this kept up. So I drugged people to D.C. not just to, and by the way, I do have some friends in the deep state. Like, you can imagine most MIT graduates don't end up getting elected. They end up working in the executive branch and in the spookiest and hardest problems to solve. And so I was informed about this from some of those folks. And I was concerned because I had a son who was going to MIT and was in New England. I was like, all right, have your bags packed because I might get 4 hours notice and you need to be on this side of that wall they're going to put up, proverbial wall. Anyway, so it was more than just putting them on the record for the biggest mistake in history, the biggest legislative mistake in history. It was about showing everybody that we were still functioning and sending a message. Because if they could show that the government had to shut down, they could show that everything else had to shut down. And I showed them that, oh, look, we can all still get there. And CNN... CNN reported that I was the most hated person in Washington, D.C. I know. You're clapping because that's the first time you ever heard CNN get the news right. All right, I need to speed up. Anyways, I pissed President Trump off. I was on the floor of the House ready to make the motion to force the vote. He called me. I let it go to voicemail. He called me 3 times. I go back out, and I called him back. He goes, I'm coming at you like you've never seen. Never in your life before have you seen the way in which I will come at you. I'm more popular than you in Kentucky, and you know it. I'm backing your primary opponent, and you're going to lose. And so I tried my rebuttal, but he started screaming, and it looked like I was on mute, but I wasn't on mute. He was just screaming, and he didn't want to hear a word I had to say. He goes, this is the second time you've done something like this, and they talked me out of it before, but not this time. And I was immediately hopeful because it was my 8th time. He was only blaming me for like stopping the war with Iran. That's the only one that he could remember that was me. But there was the fake Obamacare repeal. There was some other things that I had done this to. But I won my primary with 81% of the vote 6 weeks later. Some of the stuff most interesting to you, I'm going to have to do this stuff in speed round, but I got COVID early on. I had it in January of 2020, before they had acknowledged it was here. I was sick as a dog, sick as I've ever been, felt like I was hit by a truck. And that summer, when the antibody test came out, I took the test. I had the antibodies. It was like, woo, nice. So when the vaccines came out, I got the FDA data that was the stuff that was available and looked at it. And there was absolutely no evidence. Actually, there was a negative correlation that if you had already had COVID, that the vaccine would help you. It wasn't going to help you. But the CDC reported that it would in their MMWR, which is not scientific. It's monthly mortality or something report. So I called up the CDC. I'm a congressman, right? They can't not take my call. And by the way, Trump was president, so I called up the head of their DC office and said, need to talk to you about something I think you got wrong in this report. And she said, well, let me get our top scientists on the line. And so she called me back. This was in December of 2020, and I recorded every freaking call. And they said I was right, that they had made a mistake, and that they would fix it. And in fact, we talked about how would you fix it? Would you issue a retraction? Would you correct the document? Would you highlight it? And they agreed to all those things, and I got all on recording. And then January 6th happened. So the switch over of presidency and all the riots and stuff, which was instigated in large part by the government, which there's video evidence of that. And the pipe bombs were a government ruse. My staff and I were the ones who found the discovery of the pipe bomb and how that was just so convenient, the timing for that. Anyways, so I lost focus, and a month later, in the end of January, I looked, and they hadn't changed anything. They had lied to me. So I called them up again, and I got the list of the scientists who were on the paper, the fake paper, and I got my staff to find their cell numbers, and I called them at home in Georgia. And I said, hello, this is Congressman Massie. And Dr. So-and-so was like, I'm like, do you realize your paper's a lie and your name is on it? And I got all that recorded. And so I released it to Cheryl Atkinson, who's an investigative journalist and she blew the whistle on him, but nobody did anything. So then we took over the majority, and I was chair of the subcommittee on antitrust and regulatory reform, and I convinced Jim Jordan to let me investigate what the FDA approval of the vaccines. Because do you remember there were the top 2 vaccine approvers at the FDA, each Marion Gruber and Philip Krause, each with 30 years of experience. I mean, they drink the Kool-Aid, okay? Every vaccine they think is good because they've approved it for 30 years. They quit right when the vaccine went from EUA to BLA. They quit mysteriously. So I got them in. I would have subpoenaed them if I had to, but I didn't have to, and spent 5 hours deposing each of them. And they had been forced by their boss, Peter Marks, and Janet Woodcock, the acting director of FDA at the time, who were taking all their orders from the top from Biden. They were forced to approve that and skip all of the regular procedures they took. And then they also were forced to do the EUA on the boosters, which were coming out. And their point was not everybody needs a booster, right? And so I collected all this. I brought in their evil boss, Peter Marks, and deposed him. Because when he fired them, he just took their jobs. He's like a cardiologist or something. He didn't know anything about vaccines. So he approved all this stuff without going through the process and without using an advisory board and everything. And then they needed that to mandate it. That we found out in email. They needed the BLA to do the mandates. And so the mandates all came from that. But anyways, I exposed all that. I had a hearing. In the hearing, I asked one of the vaccine experts, did you take the booster? This is the second in command of vaccine approval at FDA. He said never took the booster, not even the first one. So I do have to, this is one of the things I want to give. I love Bobby Kennedy. I got to give him credit. He fired Peter Marks. And okay, I said I was going to speed up. I'm still trying to speed up. There was a period of time where I was considered for ag secretary because you can't make America healthy again just by changing what drugs we take or taking certain drugs off the market. It's about food. If you don't get nutrient-dense food, you're going to be sick. If you raise livestock and you feed them bad hay, there is no amount of injections you can do to keep your cattle alive and healthy. It all starts with good food. And Bobby Kennedy knew this, so he wanted me to be ag secretary. And some of you in this crowd were actually helping on that project where we were planning out the entire org chart. And Bobby put so much effort into this. One day I was on the phone with him. I said, I'm worried about something. He said, what? I said, I don't think Trump would ever appoint me. He said, why is that? And I said, because I haven't endorsed him. And you guys have put so much work in this. He said, well, it sounds like you need to endorse him. I said, okay, I will. So I said, how do I do that? He said, come to this rally in Wisconsin with me and Tulsi, announce it on stage. And I'm thinking, I don't want to go to Wisconsin in October. So I put it off. I wrote an endorsement of Trump. Next day, I woke up in my hotel room. I was in Orlando at a Food Freedom event with Weston A. Price. And I looked at my endorsement. And then Donald Trump had left a personal message to me when my wife passed away, a very nice message. And so I listened to that message again, and I thought, well, I'll call his staff and work through this endorsement and work out the trip to Wisconsin. So I pressed the number that he had left the message from, and on the second ring, I hear, hello, this is Donald. I was still in my underwear. So I thanked him for leaving the message about my wife when she passed away, and he said, that's a hard one. That's a very hard one. You know, Arnold Palmer, he played around a lot, but he did love his wife. And when she passed away, it almost killed Arnie. 5 years later, he got remarried. It was hard. But you're a tough cookie like Arnie. You'll make it through this. And then he paused. He says, I take it back. You're much tougher than Arnie ever was. Then he goes, you're a sharp cookie too. You went to MIT. You know, my uncle, Professor John G. Trump taught at MIT 41 years. It's a record. And then he goes, I've got the best genetics. So we know he believes in science. At least genetics. Anyways, I said, well, how do I want to endorse you. Oh, this is wonderful. This is tremendous. Like, how do we get the message out? He goes, oh, just tweet it. I'll retweet you. Save myself a trip to Wisconsin. I ultimately, it turned out there was a circle of people around Trump who kept my name from getting to him. So 2 weeks after he was won the elections, he was president-elect, Mark Meadows, who I'm friends with, who's Trump's former chief, he said, just call him up and ask for the job. He'll appreciate that. So I called up Trump, and he took my call again. And we started talking about cabinet positions. He wanted to know what I thought about the other ones. And he said, he went through a few of them. I gave him my opinion. He said, what about Matt Gaetz for DOJ? And I said, oh, he's sharp. He'd be great. And he was persecuted himself. He's got a good motive to get to the bottom of everything. Yeah, well, the DOJ made my life living hell for several years. I thought I'd let them try it a few years. Then he said, what about Bobby? Is he too much? Is he too much for HHS? And I said, what do you mean, is he too much? He said, don't you think we need some vaccines? I said, well, I don't think he wants to ban all the vaccines, but even if you put the craziest son of a bitch you can find at the top of any of these agencies, it's so hard to change anything. They might change it 1 or 3%. Like, you should put the strongest, horse you can find. And he said, do you know Bobby? And I said, yeah. He said, are you friends with Bobby? I said, sort of. He said, call him up. Tell him to get ready. So Bobby's supposed to get me a job. So I called up Bobby Kennedy. I said, I've got good news and bad news. Well, what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is Trump thinks you want to ban all vaccines. He said, I never said that. And I said, well, that's what he thinks. I said, you better straighten that out. And he said, why? And I said, because it sounds like he's going to pick you. And so the next day, he picked Bobby Kennedy to head up HHS. So, man, I would love to tell you so much more, but here's what I'm going to do. Yeah. Oh, I did ask for the ag job. He goes, oh, I didn't know you wanted it. Like, after all of this work, right? And ultimately, I didn't get picked because there were people there who felt I hadn't been loyal enough to him. Like during COVID, for instance, when I didn't go along with the CARES Act and whatnot. Even though I think he himself was over it. I have so many other stories. I wanted to tell you about the Epstein resolution I'm doing. Had the biggest press conference on Capitol Hill that anybody can ever remember. And yesterday, we got our first scalp. The British fired their ambassador to the United States for his connections to Epstein. Okay, but before I give you the call to action, I want to give you a call to action. First of all, what not to do. If you think government is the solution, just stop right there. I think that's the wrong answer. For instance, in Kentucky, our state legislature passed a law that said the University of Kentucky, which is a state school, so they have authority of it, needed to buy so much product, grown in Kentucky product, made in Kentucky. So they passed this in the state legislature. Guess what University of Kentucky bought? Pepsi Cola from the bottling plant, because it was bottled in Kentucky. So, your best intentions, if you think you're going to get the government and some board established in Washington, D.C., and they're going to act in your best interest to regulate something, probably not. It's probably going to get turned around on you. Another thing, Real ID, bad idea. And people say, oh, well, I didn't have to give them any more information when I went to get my new driver's license. It's Real ID. They didn't collect any information. They don't need to collect it. They have already got the information. The Real ID is your index card into your account of information that the government has on you. It's so that they can prove that squishy mammal is actually the person they have all the data on. And then the other thing you don't want is E-Verify. E-Verify has been sold to conservatives to say, oh, listen, we don't want illegals getting a job, so let's do E-Verify. The problem is, if everybody in here has to get E-Verified, and if you start a company, you got to E-Verify your kid, okay? And it's about control. They'll change it into V-Verify the next time they want to mandate a vaccine. Oh, well, he's not vaccinated. He's not V-Verified. And they'll already have the database along with the ID to prove that you belong to your entry in the database. So you want less government. I would tell you about the PRIME Act, which is a bill to make it easier for farmers to sell meat locally, to get it processed locally. I'll just leave you with this. The sponsor of my PRIME Act in the Senate sounds like a hamburger. His name's Senator Angus King. And he's a Democrat. Okay. Here's a call to action. First of all, if you can, help me get reelected. I have 3 billionaires who've already run $2 million of ads against me, and it's 8 months until the election. And guess what? So the ads they run are things about like flag burning. They say I support flag burning. That's not true. I support the First Amendment. I would never burn a flag, but I would support your right to burn your flag. Okay, so they run these ads that have nothing to do with what they're really mad about, these 3 billionaires. I've never voted for a war. I've been trying to stop every war we're in, and I don't vote for foreign aid. And they're mad at me over those 3 things. So that's why they're spending all this money. Oh, and I just found out one of them is now Epstein had a phone book, which has already been publicly released. It's not an implication or an indictable thing to be in his list of closest friends he knows their cell phones of, but one of the billionaires lives in West Palm Beach and was in Epstein's phone book that's running the ads against me. Okay, if you want to work with your congressmen or your senators, make a phone call. Don't write a letter, don't send an email, don't do a tweet, make a phone call, because that's the most effective way. I represent 750,000 people. I'll probably get less than 10 phone calls today. And so the signal-to-noise ratio is highest on phone calls. And I've been on the floor of the House when people are wavering, and they're saying, how many phone calls did you get for this? How many phone calls? This works for state legislators or federal legislators. Don't be a frequent flyer. We have a guy named Michael that calls every day. If he doesn't call, we ask the sheriff to do a wellness check. Have anybody in here heard that small acts of kindness can make a big difference? All right, I don't want you to do a small act of kindness. I want you to do small acts of noncompliance. Yeah. This is the only reason we're not still locked down. It's the people who, when they didn't get on the airplane and say, you can't make me wear a mask. They got on the airplane and asked for some peanuts. And as soon as they got the peanuts, they took the mask off and never put it back on. They forgot. And they had to be reminded 5 times to, oh, I'm so sorry. I was just eating a peanut. If you can do it, what's even better is open and notorious acts of noncompliance. I did one of these on the House Floor of Representatives. We had a mask mandate on the House Floor of Representatives, and they would not let you even speak on the floor unless you wore the mask. The speaker wouldn't recognize you. So they kind of had you in a bind. So they asked Pelosi in a press conference, when are you going to end the mask mandate? And she said, when everybody's vaccinated. I said, shit, this thing is morphing. Just like my planning commission was morphing into a zoning commission, just like HOA morphed into ISIS, just like this mask mandate was morphing into a congressional vaccine mandate. So I got a dozen other congressmen, and while there was a vote happening where they show the whole floor of the House and they put the vote totals on C-SPAN, we know where the camera points. We walked down there and stood in front of the C-SPAN cameras with no masks for the whole vote series. Thank you. And then we got a warning. And then the next day, if you did it, you got a fine. And they took it out of your salary, which is unconstitutional according to the 27th Amendment. You can't vary a congressman's salary without an intervening election. Some people think that was made so we don't raise our own salaries, but it was without being subjected to the ballot box. But the founding fathers talked about this. The reason you can't lower a judge's salary, that's in the base constitution. The reason you can't vary a congressman's salary is if you can take a man's sustenance and the thing that keeps him and his family going, you can control that man. And the founding fathers knew it. In fact, this is why, even though I represent the state of Kentucky, I'm paid out of the Treasury. They didn't want people in Kentucky, the legislators in Kentucky, mucking with my salary because they wanted me to represent the people in Kentucky. So I took this lawsuit with Pelosi. By the way, it was $500. I only paid the fine once, and I never wore a mask again because I figured out the sergeant at arms had to find me and issue the citation. So for 6 months, I would go to the floor of the House and keep my eye on the sergeant at arms, make sure he was over in that corner. But there'd be times where you just get in this passionate debate with another congressman, and I turn around, oh, shit. And I run into the cloakroom because he wasn't allowed in the cloakroom. I did that for 6 months without getting fined. That was the small act of noncompliance. But I mean, can you imagine our founders? Like, how embarrassed would they be that was hide and seek with the sergeant at arms? Anyways, I took it all the way to Supreme Court. Our venue was D.C. court. We lost at the circuit and the district court. We took it to Supreme Court. They wouldn't hear it, which means basically 27th Amendment is dead. But they don't referee fights within Congress. They said you guys could solve this inside of Congress. But it was worth the fight. And in the meantime, somebody saw somebody fighting. So here's the other thing I would say: engage locally. Most of the control that's taken over your lives is done locally, not even at the state legislature. It's like the planning board, the zoning board, the HOA, the county executive, or the mayor, or the council. Like, run for those offices. Get in there. Even if you're just one vote and you can't change it. If you're on a school board, you know what happens in the meeting, right? And then you can tell people what happens in the meeting. Well, maybe you can't carry the day with a motion, but you can make a motion and force a vote and put them on record. And that's what I do. And then you can show to the rest of the people that are electing them, this is where your school board member stands because I made them take a vote. And that's the biggest power we have. And I'll end with this. There was a woman in our district who called the congressman before me, and she was very upset that her trash hadn't been picked up. And he said, ma'am, I'm a U.S. congressman. I don't deal with the trash pickup. And did you think about calling your county commissioner? And she said, well, Gene, of course I thought of that, but I'm not going to start that high up. Thank you, and God bless.